What is up, and welcome back to How to Invest in Commercial Real Estate. Today is a super exciting day because we have a guest on the podcast, and we talk about taxes and tax savings we utilize in real estate all the time. But today we wanted to bring on somebody who is, an authority in this matter. Erik Oliver is going to be joining us, and he's with Cost Segregation Authority. And he's going to go in depth on just some of the tax benefits, but specifically cost segregation that we utilize in real estate all the time and that are a massive benefit just to the whole asset class. So Erik, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Welcome, Erik.
Yeah, no, thanks guys for having me. My name's Erik Oliver. I'm with Cost Segregation Authority. We've been doing cost segregation for a little over a decade now. Done close to 15,000 studies. We do studies in all 50 states. So wherever the building is, we'll do the study. Partner mainly with CPAs and real estate investors on just reducing their tax liability through cost segregation. So like I said, we do a lot of training for CPAs. CPAs, it's kind of a specialty service that we offer. CPAs are kind of your general practitioners per se. And so they have to know a little bit about, thousands and thousands of pages of tax code, but they don't necessarily have the time or bandwidth to dive deep into depreciation. And so that's really where we partner with these CPAs to help them and specialize in this service. So that's kind of a little bit about who we are and what we do.
So let people listening, they've purchased a commercial asset, commercial real estate building, and they say, what is a cost segregation study and how is it going to help me after I've purchased it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So cost segregation really is just accelerated depreciation. So one of the benefits of owning real estate is being able to take these deductions against your income. So typically real estate is depreciated over either 39 years or 27 and a half years. So that's 39 years for commercial property, 27 and a half years for residential. And again, so if you buy, just to make the math easy, if you have a $270,000 asset and it's depreciated over 27 and a half years, you're getting a $10,000 write-off every year towards your taxes. So that comes off your taxable income. So
that's in addition to the expenses that you're already writing off.
Yeah, exactly. Depreciation is just a non-cash expense. And so you just add that as an expense. And so that comes off your taxable income. But what if we could, instead of taking 1/27th or 1/39th of a deduction every year, I may not even own my building in 39 years. So I want my deductions now. And so if we can front load those deductions into the early years by doing
that.
Oh,
could you say it again, please?
Sorry, Siri thought I was talking to her. Let me turn I wasn't talking to you, Siri. Hold on. So if we can front load those deductions and take advantage of those deductions in the early year, it's more beneficial. The reason you do that, obviously, there's a time value of money element. There's inflation. A dollar today is worth more than a dollar in the future. And the way that's done is, like I said, through an engineering-based study where we will go in, and when you buy an asset, you're not just buying the land and the walls, you're also buying everything inside the building, plus all the land improvements on the outside. So, for example, carpet should be depreciated over 5 years versus 39 years. Your parking lot should be depreciated over 15 years versus 39 years. But you don't know the value of those components when you buy a building. You buy a building, you pay $1 million for it. You don't know that the parking lot's worth $80,000 or that the carpet's worth $10,000 or the cabinets are worth $18,000. And so that's really where a cost segregation study comes in, to segregate those into different buckets so that you can accelerate your deductions.
So a normal commercial depreciation schedule is about 2.5% a year, roughly. So do you have an average of what those first few years would be using a cost segregation study approximately? I know every building is going to be different.
That's a good question.
Yeah, no, that is a great question. So yeah, different asset classes will yield different results, but typically we segregate around 30%. Now, what that means is land is non-depreciable. So you have to back out your land value. So if you buy a building for $1.2 million and the land is worth $200,000, that gives you $1 million of what we call depreciable basis. Now, of that $1 million, we can typically segregate around 30% of that, or 300,000 of that, into those shorter asset lives. And under the current tax law, there's something called bonus depreciation, which allows you to take 100% of those deductions in the first year. So if you're getting 100% of 30%, you're going to get a $300,000 write-off in the first year on that $1 million building.
That's great.
And then the The other 70% gets divided up over the next 38 years. And you'll take a small portion. You don't use all of it in the first year, but you take a small portion in the years going forward.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a massive advantage. I mean, when it comes to selling these reports, I'm assuming there's some sort of cost associated with this and some sort of lead time. I mean, what is the time frame and cost to be expected by an average person or an average building, I guess I would say, for something like this?
Sure. So cost is kind of a tough one. It's based on the size and scope of each project, but we do everything from single family rentals for 2,500 to 3,000, all the way up to ski resorts and large shopping centers that might be 50,000 because there's multiple buildings. So I know that's a wide range. Typically on $1 million commercial building, you're probably somewhere around $4,000, $5,000 for a study. But if you're getting a $300,000 deduction, you
Right.
take that times your 35% tax bracket, you're at over $100,000 in tax savings just in the first year, assuming you can absorb those deductions.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you have to do this cost segregation analysis the first year that you own the building? Obviously that's to your advantage, but what if you own one right now and you're in your second or third year? Could it be done now?
Yeah, it can. And that's one of the great advantages. Cost segregation is one of the few tools that has this type of flexibility where you can kind of pick and choose when you play that card. So let's say you owned a building since 2015, you've never done a cost segregation study. The IRS allows us to go back, do a cost segregation study today, take those deductions on your current tax return, your 2022 tax return, without having to amend any prior years. And so there's just a form that you have to fill out that says, hey, IRS, I've been taking my standard deduction. I'm now going to accelerate those deductions into my current year. And here's the difference in those numbers. And it's actually, I was just going to add, it's actually kind of interesting. You're actually checking a box on that form that says you were depreciating your carpet incorrectly. You're now going to fix it and depreciate it correctly because carpet is a 5-year asset. It should be depreciated over 5 years. And here's the difference in those numbers. So you're going from an impermissible method of depreciation to a permissible. Now, the IRS isn't going to come tell you, hey, guys, you're depreciating your carpet slower than you should be because that's just more money in their coffers. Yeah. So they allow it to happen. But you're actually going from an impermissible method to a permissible method. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You had a question?
No, it wasn't a question. It was just interesting because I think our accountant, once they had already entered it in the depreciation scale, they didn't think we could go back and change it. So it's just an interesting point that I'll have to bring up with them, that you can actually redo it once you've got it set in motion.
Yeah, that's a misconception. A lot of CPAs, and again, it's no fault of your CPA. CPAs, they don't have the bandwidth to dive deep into this depreciation. But yes, you can absolutely go back, even if you've already established your depreciation method, using that 3115 change in accounting method form, you can go back and take those deductions on your current year.
So, Eric, another question I have. Could an individual try to do a cost segregation analysis on their own, or is the IRS going to come to you and say, you have no basis because you have no experience, and so therefore people need to use someone like you or maybe an experienced CPA that you've trained? What happens there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the IRS actually just released their updated audit guide on how to audit these types of reports. So this is a guide that they give their agents and say, hey, if you come across these reports, this is how you need to look at them. And in that audit guide, it does say there's no governing body for cost segregation. And so you could do your own cost seg study. You probably wouldn't know what to look for. And if you were ever to get audited, it would probably get thrown out. And the reason for that is in the audit guide, it does state that you need to have somebody with both construction or engineering background as well as tax knowledge, and they need to be experienced in both those fields. It doesn't say that it says you should, it doesn't say you have to. Now, the reason you want to, and the reason it is worth paying the fee to get a study done, if you were to do a cost seg study, actually, we've had CPAs do their own cost seg studies for their clients, especially on new construction. A lot of times CPA will say, hey, my client built a building, right? I have a list of all the broken out costs. I'm going to go ahead and just pull out the carpet and pull out the cabinets and pull out the appliances or what have you. That's great. And they'll be able to capture some of those deductions. But when you have an engineering-based study done, we're going to look at things like the indirect costs. I actually just learned this year. I've been doing this for 7 years and just learned, when you go to a construction site and they have the porta potties out there, Those porta potties for those construction workers go into the basis of your building. That's an indirect cost. The fencing around the work site, those are indirect costs. Your CPA won't know to break those out and to allocate those over the useful lives. So we'll pick up the indirect costs. And then the second thing, which is most important, where we see the biggest difference, is allocating the electrical and the plumbing. So again, if I'm a CPA and I got a list of costs and it says $200,000 for electrical work, I don't know what of that 200,000 was for my sockets on the walls versus the plumbing or the electrical work for my appliances. Because if it's for the appliances, I get to depreciate that electrical work over 5 years. But if it's for my light switches or my sockets on the walls, that gets depreciated over 39. So they don't have that engineering background or the construction knowledge to be able to pull it out. So again, we usually will get around 30 to 35% segregation. If you guys were to do it yourself or your CPA was to do it themselves, you'd probably get somewhere between 10 and 15. And so that difference in that 10 or 15% difference could, on $1 million building, that could be $150,000 of additional depreciation times a 30% tax bracket. That's a $45,000 difference. So it's worth paying us $4,000 to do the study if we can generate that additional $45,000 of deduction. So
sure. And so is that example you just gave, is that a typical return on investment for you, kind of a 10 to 1? Is that what someone can see from one of your studies?
It's probably higher than that. So on that $1 million building, if we're segregating 30%, we're going to reclassify about $300,000 worth of assets. And conservatively, let's say you're in a 30% combined state and federal, 300,000 times 30%, that's a $90,000 tax savings. And on that building, it's probably going to cost you $4,000 or $5,000 for the study.
Okay.
So, significant returns, especially with this bonus depreciation that's available right now.
Right.
Well, I remember there's a couple other areas that you had some expertise in that we may wanted to talk about. Do you remember what those were?
Yeah, the energy credits that you talk about on your website. Those are things that we're not really familiar with. I wondered if you could touch on those for just a bit.
Yeah, so there's really two credits or / deductions that are extremely underutilized in our industry. One is the 45L energy credit. Now, the 45L energy credit is specific for residential units. So if you're building single-family homes, apartment buildings, student housing, senior housing, and you're building them to a certain spec that is required by the IRS to be considered energy efficient, under the current tax law for 2022, you're eligible for a $2,000 credit per dwelling unit. So if you build a fourplex and it's energy efficient according to the IRS standards, you do have to have a third party come out and look at it. And if it's energy efficient, you're going to get an $8,000 tax credit that comes right off your tax bill, which is great. Now, to qualify for these, the counties around the country and just the building codes and the building materials throughout the country, it's kind of hard not to qualify for these because the counties are going to require you to put in certain types of material or certain amounts of material. And so they're fairly easy to qualify for, but they're just not that well known. And I think the reason is the IRS will allow these programs to expire. And then at the end of the year, they'll vote on it and say, yeah, that was kind of a good program. Let's go back and backdate it. For example, this 45L expired at the end of 2021. And it wasn't until about a month ago that they reinstated it. So for the last 10 months, we didn't know if 45L was even going to be around for this year. So I think CPAs kind of lose it on their radar. But the great opportunity for any developer, anybody who's building new residential units to get those credits. That's the first one. The second one is mostly for your commercial property. It's called the 179D, and that's an energy deduction. The 179D is a deduction, not a credit. Similar program, you're looking at things like the insulation on the walls, the windows, the efficiency of the windows, the efficiency of the heating and air. If your building that you're building meets the criteria, you may be eligible for up to $2.50 per square foot of a deduction. And so, it's a great opportunity. Again, needs to be certified by a third party. So you'd have somebody like us come in, take a look at the blueprints, take a look at the property. We run some modeling to say, yeah, this building is energy efficient according to the IRS standards. And we would issue a deduction in that case of $2.50 per square foot. Now, good news is with the Inflation Reduction Act, those deductions for next year are going up from $2 to $2.50 and as much as $5 for next year. So essentially, you could get a $5 per square foot deduction next year for buildings that are placed into service.
Wow.
Yeah, so the numbers are going up. Inflation's going up, so they increased that. And I failed to mention they also increased the 45L from $2,000 to $2,500 and up to $5,000, depending on how energy efficient your residential units are. So,
Nice.
Good news is they're going up for next year.
Maybe have to hold off on the service of the Criterion buildings on next year.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty interesting because I think most of these things you're talking about, most people think they can get handled by their CPA. And I think just like you were talking about in the beginning, a lot of your education and maybe lead generation is coming through talking to CPAs to support them. But it sounds like that just going to you directly and saying, hey, here's my portfolio, anything you could help me with. I mean, it seems like that would even be like a free phone conversation. Hey, here's what I have. Can you help me? Either yes or no.
Yeah, absolutely. We work with investors all the time directly. And then we always want to get the CPA involved because they have the big picture of what your tax situation looks like. Maybe you had some deductions that are carrying forward from last year that we're not aware of. And so we don't want to ever engage a client if they're not going to save significant tax dollars immediately. But yeah, we work within the building owners themselves. We'll take a look at their portfolio and say, hey, here's what we think we can do. Let's get your CPA on the phone to confirm these are going to make sense. And then, partner with your CPA to make sure we're maximizing those deductions.
I assume you can work with anybody all over the country, right?
Yeah. We do studies in all 50 states. We've got clients all over the place. So,
do you have to actually go to the job site, or you can look at plans, or how do you?
Depending on which program it is, sometimes we do have to go to the job site. Cost segregation, the IRS does require a site visit. One of the nice things that came out of COVID is we were able to start doing a lot of these site visits virtually, just through a video conferencing app. That doesn't work on large properties. On some of the smaller properties, we can do a site visit in a half hour, and we would just have you or one of your property managers on one end of the line. We've got our costing engineers on the other end. We're asking to see certain components of the building. But yeah, we do want to see each building. We want to take pictures of it, document what's in there so that if we ever to get audited on any of these, we've got the backup documentation to substantiate our numbers.
Yeah, great.
Makes sense. I think it's going to be super helpful to our investor base when they get on here and take a look. And if they already own property, they can bring it to you and see if you can save them any money.
Well, Eric, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you? I'm assuming you have a website, a phone number. How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah. So the best way is just through our website. It's just www.cost-authority.com. It's got our phone number. It's got our email address on there. My direct contact information is on there. And we will provide a free benefit analysis to anybody who reaches out. You can do that through the website. So if you've got a property you think might be a good candidate, or you just want us to look at all your properties, we're happy to do that and say, hey, this property is not a good candidate. This one is, this one's not. Give you some preliminary numbers so you know what the fee would be in relation to what your tax savings would be. And then you can decide from there on how to best move forward. But yeah, use this as a resource. We're kind of a niche accounting firm. We don't do tax returns here at our firm. We just do these cost segregation and energy credits. And so we don't bill by the hour. I mean, you can call us anytime and say, hey, I've got this building. Do you think it's a good candidate? We're happy to walk through it.
Excellent.
Some advice. Yeah. So
awesome. Well, Eric, I really appreciate you coming on. I really appreciate meeting you. I'll definitely be sending you a property we're bringing online here pretty soon just to see if you can save us any money. Love for that to happen because I didn't know about these energy credits.
Yeah.
But anyway, thanks for joining us, and we will see everyone else next week on how to invest in CRE.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
thanks,
thanks,
Eric.
yeah, thanks for having me. Have a great day.
You too.